So it's great to talk with you, and I'm glad to have this opportunity for our families to get to know you a little bit better. You are one of our wonderful chamber music coaches at Prep Music. You also come from a very musical background, and so I'd love to hear you talk about what it was like growing up in a musical family, if you want to share a little bit with us.
Well, my mother, when she was going to Manhattan School of Music, decided when she was going to school that the thing that was most exciting to her would be to play it in a string quartet. So she decided to look for a musical husband who could produce a musical string quartet, and she almost made it. She almost we didn't kind we have a musical trio, not a quartet. Um, and they met while he was a cantorial student in New York, and she was going to Manhattan School. I think they were both going to Manhattan School of Music. So it was almost, the choice I had growing up was which instrument would I like to play, not would I like to play an instrument. And then it would be, of course, in a string quartet. So what happened as we were growing, I have two brothers, Joel, Jeremy, who's the famous one, and Joel, who's the not so famous one, but we're all musicians. Jeremy is Quartet San Francisco, and Joel is a cellist in Ukiah who's performing all over the place. Um, anyway, as we were growing up, my mother, who was a singer, was giving lessons to people in the Oakland Symphony. And in exchange for those lessons, one of the kids would get lessons on an instrument that they
Hmm.
of the student. So I got lessons on oboe and violin and bass and a couple of other instruments, trumpet, and Joel got lessons on cello and trombone and bassoon and whatever else. I think Jeremy was a little bit young to actually start lessons at that time, but he took up violin. Um, and that's how we started lessons. I mean, we had a principal instrument. I was violin, Joel was cello, Jeremy was violin, but we had a great musical tradition. My mother was then teaching at Cal State Hayward, now Cal State East Bay, as a vocal teacher, and basically that's we grew up in a musical family, and my father, of course, was a cantor, so he was a singer as well. Playing music keeps you active, keeps dementia from setting in, keeps arthritis from setting in, because you're using those muscles and those facilities all the time. I've had over the years several students who were physically challenged for some reason or another, extreme back issues or arm issues or something, and part of my teaching style is to make sure that if you're playing violin, you play as comfortably as possible, because that will make it possible in your 60s and 70s and 80s to continue to play without all these physical problems. I've seen too many violinists. I don't know. I would imagine the cellos have fewer issues along those lines, but I've seen lots of violinists and violas who are compromised later in life because they simply have too many bad. Um, they've been playing
With
in a
bad
way
habits.
that injures them.
Right, right.
So I've thought a couple of times of taking on students who were physically challenged just as a. I also have a little background in medicine and as an EMT, so I was thinking of maybe setting up a practice where I could teach people to play and enjoy
Without
it,
moving.
enjoy the comfort to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real issue that more and more in the last 20 or 30 years, I think musicians and music teachers are much more aware of how we use ourselves
Oh,
physically.
absolutely.
I'm curious, growing up in a musical family and having a brother who also, you both played the same instrument, what was that like? Were there issues of competition between you, or what was that like for you?
Actually, we had very little competition. When I was 15, ran off to Europe for a couple of years. I studied there at the conservatory in Switzerland and Germany. Germany is like 7 years younger than I am.
Mm.
And by the time I got back, he was already looking at going to uh, New York, to Brooklyn College, where he started studying, I think, with Perlman at that time. And so he was in his field and I was in my field, and we didn't have a lot of opportunity to play. Joel and I, as we were playing up, would play the Haydn trios all the time with my mother. So that was the kind of a staple of what we did from time to time. I grew up in a family where we had violins and cellos. I like the idea if there are a couple of siblings that, they take up instruments that they can play with each other all the time.
Yeah,
It's a little bit tough if one kid plays the tuba and the other one plays, a violin.
right.
So there, and it helps a lot. I recommend all of my students that they should also learn a little bit of piano,
Hmm.
just for the practical, being able to hear what it scales like, being able to be able to refer to a piano,
Visually too.
right, helps them to play any other instrument that they might be taking up,
Yeah, because
and
hearing,
understand the problems of that instrument,
right.
with regard to another instrument.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's good advice.
The one regret I think I've had is that I haven't been able to go into a hotel lobby and just start playing the piano and
Mm,
impressing people.
yeah.
Uh, my mother was a pianist, and I had piano lessons when I was young, but it was we were knocking heads all the time.
Mm.
You know, I was not early on a good practicer. Um, I remember a story that my mother tells about. I don't remember which brother it is, so I won't identify them. But she would forced us to play for half an hour,
Mhm.
and he said, in fact, I do remember who it was. He said, "I don't want to do it." He said, "Well, you can sit there and you can cry for a half an hour, and then you can practice for half an hour, and then you can go out and he wanted to go out and play baseball with his friends." And it says, "And you can cry for half an hour, and then you can practice for half an hour, and then you can go out and play, or you can practice for half an hour, and you can go out and play with your friends." So she really kind of forced us to play.
Mhm.
I even had some early on violin teachers who said I should give up. I should not play because I did not practice enough.
Mm.
And it wasn't until, this is actually an interesting story. It wasn't until B. Myers. She loved playing violin. I had teachers who were members of the Oakland Symphony, who were members of the San Francisco Symphony, and they were all good. But she loved playing violin, and it was something that I simply was not interested in doing without. If I can instill that in any of my students, I just that just the first thing I tell parents when I take on private students is this is a commitment for you for the next 10 years to make sure that they practice for 15 minutes, a half an hour, whatever it is. They can do basketball, they can do soccer, they can do all the other things, but they need to practice and they need to
Yeah,
continue lessons for the next foreseeable future.
right.
That's the commitment. It's the parents' commitment, because kids, they until they get that for themselves, they need some structure in order to put that together.
Exactly.
It's extraordinarily rare for a kid to take up music successfully if the parents aren't on board, either as musicians or at least have the mindset that this education is important for them.
Exactly. It's so important.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy most about teaching? And then share with me what you find most challenging about teaching.
It's the thing I enjoy most about teaching is the 1,001 times in a week that some kid says, "I got it." Those instances can happen daily And they do. Every lesson I have, if the kid has worked, if the kid has put any effort into it at all, something happens that go, yeah, they got it.
Yeah.
They may not realize it, but they got it and they can move on from here.
Right.
And over time, that makes a good musician.
Hmm.
I think the most challenging thing about teaching is having faith that that the kids are going to have that experience for themselves. You have to learn patience. You have to learn Zen and let the world happen, as it will happen with your guidance, and trust that your guidance will make a difference ultimately down the road. And I'm not quite that patient. That's the most challenging thing, is to trust that what I'm doing has value. And it always does. Ultimately, it always does.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
I always enjoy our conversations.